Thank you everybody for coming to the Toadstool event for Jeff Benedict on Dynasty. Um, Jeff Benedict is the best-selling author of 16 nonfiction books, including New York Times bestseller Tiger Woods with Armand Katayan. I apologize if I butchered the last name. Um, he has also been a special features writer for Sports Illustrated and the Los Angeles Times, and his essays have appeared in the New York Times. His stories have been the basis of segments in 60 Minutes, CBS Sunday Morning, HBO's Real Sports with Bryant Gumbel, the Discovery Channel, Good Morning America, 48 Hours, 2020, and the NFL Network, NPR, and ASPN, Outside the Lines. He is also a television film producer. He lives with his wife and 4 children in Connecticut. And go ahead and take it away, Jeff.
Hey, thanks for the introduction and for having me here. Grateful to be able to spend a little bit of time with some fellow New Englanders, especially in a time of COVID when we can't do these things in person in bookstores, which I have to say, when I was working on this book, I was actually really looking forward to being able to go around New England to independent bookstores and have these kinds of conversations in person. It's one of my big disappointments that we're not able to do that, but at least we have this technology that enables us to do this. For me, this was a chance of a lifetime to work on a story, a book like this, something I thought about for a long time before I actually started working on it. I'm a lifelong New Englander, was born and raised here in Connecticut. And so I don't want to say that this is something I dreamed about doing for my whole life. That's not the case, but certainly it took years I thought about this for years before I started working on it in the summer of 2018. And I really wanted, at the outset, I was really hoping I could tell the story from the inside out and from the top down. And by top down, I mean, I thought it was really important to understand the building of the dynasty from the perspective of the owner and ownership. I think that's a big part of the story that has not been explained or written about before, and I wanted to understand it in a personal way. And so when I went into this, I really approached it with 2 central questions in mind. Number one, how was this dynasty built? How was it constructed? And then secondly, once a dynasty was established in Foxborough, how was it sustained for so long, for so much longer than its predecessors? I did a comparison between the 3 dynasties that existed before, and that would be the Green Bay Packers of the 1960s, the Pittsburgh Steelers of the 1970s, and the San Francisco 49ers of the 1980s. And all 3 of those dynasties, as impressive as they were, they ran their course after about a decade. And then the head coach and the quarterback split up, or different things happened that broke them apart. This one goes double the length of that. And I really wanted to, focus on what it took to sustain that. And that really requires an explanation of and an understanding of the key relationships here between owner Robert Kraft and head coach Bill Belichick, and owner Robert Kraft and quarterback Tom Brady, and then quarterback Tom Brady and head coach Bill Belichick. So that triangle is really where I tried to keep going back to as I worked my way through the 25 years of the dynasty's history that I covered. So the other thing I'll just say before opening up for questions is that, because it's such a big story that spans 25 years, I had to be selective about who I chose to use as vehicles in different parts of the story to tell the narrative. And so players like Drew Bledsoe, players like Teddy Bruschi, players like Rob Gronkowski, players that at different points in time in this dynasty that I thought were important for me to go to and focus on. And when you have hundreds and hundreds of players, you can't write about all of them. So I picked the ones that I thought were best for enabling me to tell the story that I was trying to tell. here in the pages of the Dynasty. And those experiences of getting to know and interview some of those players that I just mentioned were some of the bright spots for me in the process, as well as other characters in the story, whether it's, Sean McManus, the president of CBS Sports, Bon Jovi, who has an important role in the story of the Dynasty, Elton John. There's just Howard Stern. There's all these other characters that find their way into the Dynasty narrative. And I thought it was important to include those because I think this is bigger than a football story. It's just not a football story. It's football, but it's so much more than that. And I also, of course, wanted the book to appeal to people besides football fans and, frankly, besides people that live in New England. So was trying to write more of an epic story about what's transpired in New England and Foxborough over the last 25 years. And as I said at the outset, it's been one of the highlights of my career has been working on this. So without further ado, I'll open it up for questions and do my best to answer them.
I guess I'll start off with like a general question, like what is the most interesting thing that you found out while researching for this project?
I don't know. With something like this, it's never one thing. It's lots of things. My editor had given me a mandate at the start of the project, which was, he said, I want to learn something new about this team on every page of this book. The book is long. It's a lot of pages. It's 500 pages, and so that's a lot of new things. And to me, there were many instances along the way where sometimes in one day I would learn 3 things that would, to me, seemed amazing. And I tried to fill the book or pack the book with those kinds of things. So you could assume that most of the things, other than the games themselves, which the games are the games and we know the outcomes of the games before you read the book, but other than what happens in the games, most of the things that are on the page were things that I found to be very surprising and very interesting.
Scott Masters is saying there has certainly been a lot of belief that with the move of Tom Brady to Tampa, do you believe that we are at the end of the dynasty?
Well, I think the team is certainly at the end of an era. The organization has, for the last 20 years, had an era that was basically had 3 main players: Kraft, Belichick, and Brady. They're the key architects of what's taken place in the last 20 years. And now one of them is gone. And so it's going to be different. It's not the same anymore. It doesn't mean that the Patriots can't continue to win. I'm certainly would never say that. But what was no longer is. And that's going to be an adjustment. It's an adjustment for the franchise. It's an adjustment for the fan base. And it's also going to be an adjustment for the league, because for the last 20 years, the Brady-Belichick partnership has been not only the most dominant, but it's been a staple of the NFL. There's a certain reliability of what is going to happen in the AFC East every year. And now Brady's in Tampa Bay, and so that'll be different. But I think we've reached the end of what I do describe in the book is it's been a golden era in Foxborough, and Brady's been a huge part of that, and he's not there anymore. So that part of it is over.
Terry Robinson is asking, what was it that enabled this dynasty to last for so long?
That's a good question. It's one that I, spend a lot of time in the book trying to answer. I think at its core, it's the relationship that Robert Kraft has with quarterback Tom Brady. and the relationship that Robert Kraft has with Bill Belichick. And I think those two relationships are largely misunderstood, partly because they don't play out in plain sight. In other words, it's easy to see the role, the rather obvious role that Belichick and Brady have played in the dynasty, because every Sunday they're performing in front of millions of people on television and 68,000 people in the stadium. And so you can see what their contribution is, and it's huge. The owner's contribution is essentially invisible, because it's what he does in his relationship with Brady and Belichick that are so critical to keeping those two together for so long. And I think one of the things that Kraft recognized early on, so we're going back to the early 2000s now, he recognized that he had the two brightest and biggest stars in the NFL were on his payroll. And for him, it became all about how to keep them on the payroll, how to keep them together. Because I don't think he ever viewed the Patriots' success as being more attributable to one than the other. I think he recognized that Brady needed Belichick and Belichick needed Brady. And the Patriots needed both of them in order to continue doing what they were doing. And so once you get past the first three Super Bowls, and then you had, of course, the perfect season that then ended in the Super Bowl with a loss to the Giants. But if you think about that period in time, 3 Super Bowl victories and then a perfect regular season that ended in a Super Bowl loss. If that had marked the end of the run with Belichick and Brady, everybody would look at that as a great run. That would have been on par with Joe Montana's run with Bill Walsh, and with Terry Bradshaw's run with Chuck Noll, and Bart Starr's run with Vince Lombardi. That's a good run. But what Kraft saw was this could go so much longer. He had a player in Brady that kept saying he was going to play, forever. He's going to keep going. And I think as time went on, Kraft saw the wisdom in not second guessing or doubting Brady. And at the same time, he appreciated and respected Belichick's style and method of coaching. And it was going to require a bridge between Brady and Belichick to keep them both satisfied and together in order to see if they could stretch the run out and win more titles, which of course they did. And I make the comparison, Terry, in the book, I compare Brady and Belichick to Lennon and McCartney because I think that it's appropriate here. You could argue that the Beatles were a band that broke up too soon. They broke up when they were at their pinnacle, and they could have made a lot more music, but that didn't happen. The two brightest stars in rock and roll history couldn't last on the same stage. And I think that that's basically the situation that Kraft was looking at in New England. Was he had the two big rock stars on his team, and he needed to keep them there. And so that was only going to happen through the relationships he forged with the two men. And that to me is really at the core of what's gone on, certainly at least in the last 10 years or the back half of the dynasty.
Jim Turner is asking, do you think Cam Newton can lead them to the Super Bowl?
I don't know. Obviously my book ends in March when Tom goes to Robert's house and informs him that he's leaving. And I don't write past that because I couldn't in order to get the book out in the fall. So I don't want to speculate on Cam Newton or what the future of the team is what they're going to do. Other than to say that they still have Kraft and they still have Belichick and they have a great roster. And so they just don't have the field general that has brought them to all these Super Bowls. And so Cam Newton stepping into some huge shoes, but he's accomplished, he's smart, he's tough. They're gonna be really interesting to watch this year, as will Tampa Bay.
Scott Masters is asking that, well, he said that he read your Tiger Woods book, and then he's asking, was this a harder write for you than the Tiger Woods one?
That's a good question. The answer is yes, it was harder. This was I would say, the most challenging book that I've ever written. I spent a lot more time thinking about the writing than I've ever spent before. And when I say thinking about the writing, what I mean is, once a lot of the research is done and it's time to start writing, I spent a lot more time thinking about what I was going to write and how I was going to structure the story. One of the reasons it was so challenging is because in Tiger Woods, I was writing about one outsized personality, one outsized figure in Tiger. Here there are three. And so finding the balance of how those three characters will appear in the narrative over time is, something that required a lot of thought. And then also how to integrate all the different elements of this story and all the other characters and personalities that are in play, whether it's, Jonathan Kraft or Drew Bledsoe or Roger Goodell or all these other people. There are so many characters in this story that if this were a novel, it would have been a disaster, because you can't have that many people. But I had to in this, because this is a true historical account. And so it was much more challenging. And, like I said, each chapter I would outline and structure it, to kind of draw it up and map it out, and then get into writing it. And then I'd find myself stopping and, again, rethinking what I'm doing on the page. And it was frankly an exhausting process. But to me, the payoff was great, because when I got to the end, I felt as though it was the story that I wanted. I mean, the narrative was where I wanted it to be. And once it feels like that, then in my mind, I can tell, probably the same way a musician can tell whether the song sounds right. Have I got it just right? And it wasn't until I felt that way with this story that I was satisfied.
Terry Robinson is asking, what caused the dynasty to begin to unwind? Did Jimmy G have anything to do with it?
No, I think that, as I look at it, there is a little bit of sort of nature involved here. I mean, we're talking 20 years. I think as New Englanders, our perspective is so skewed, because what we've been seeing and we've been a part of is not normal. And so no matter how it ended, people would ask, why did it end? It just did, because it ran its course. It was twice as long as any preceding dynasty. 20 years is an eternity in the National Football League. At some point, it's got to end. And I think Brady's 43 years old. He's certainly in the sunset years of his career, and so and Belichick is up there in years as well. I think that there's not one thing that we point to, like, Jimmy Garoppolo. I think that whole scenario with him was over exaggerated. I'm not saying that there weren't some issues there, but that's not why the dynasty ended. Look, I think Belichick did the smart thing. He kept him as long as he could before it became obvious that he really had to make a trade, or they were going to get nothing in return for him. But the smart thing was to keep him around as long as you could as a succession plan for Brady. And then if Brady does the unthinkable, which he did, then you have to deal with that. And that's what ended up happening when Brady just kept seemingly getting better and more energized as the years went on. It became clear you can't have two starting quarterbacks on your roster. The 49ers tried that with Montana and Young. It just doesn't work. And it's also just not affordable in the salary cap era. So it really forced Belichick to do what he did. He did the most practical thing that he could. But I think really just the unwinding of the dynasty is really what you're seeing is 20 years of a marriage that had run its course. And Tom could have just as easily retired after 20 years, but he still wants to play. And so he's in Tampa. But I think either way, New England should just look at the fact that they've had the best of both worlds for longer than anyone else.
Jim Turner is asking if players are having, not asking. He said, if players are having problems with Bill, should they fire Bill? I guess he is asking.
I don't think that you fire the most successful coach in the history of the NFL, especially when he's still coaching the way he always has. I think that Bill Belichick has certainly earned the status that he has. He's an institution in New England, much like Brady was, and Brady still is. I mean, Brady will always be an institution in New England, and Belichick will be as well. And Belichick is not resting on his laurels. I mean, that's the thing. He's working just as hard now as he did, when he got there. And so I don't think, and by the way, I think players love coming to New England to play for him. That's why so many, Cam Newton's a perfect example. I mean, why is he here? Well, I think he wanted to play for Bill Belichick. He wanted to have a chance to win a title. And Bill has a long history of attracting players like that, meaning when I say like that, I mean Newton is another example of a super talented, accomplished player who's had a lot of years in the NFL, but hasn't won a championship yet. And this might be his shot. And Bill's been doing that for a long time.
Now he's asking, how much do you think money played a role in Tom's leaving? Meaning, did the years of pay sacrifices take a toll?
I don't know about that. I just think it was time. I mean, in football life, 20 years is more than a life. I mean, the average life expectancy of a career in the NFL is under 3 years. And Tom is the ultimate outlier. 20 years is a long time to do the same thing in the same place with the same people. And I just think the fact is that he clearly wants to play longer and see how long he can do it for. And it was time for him to try somewhere else. I mean, Joe Montana did that after a much shorter career in San Francisco. I think that not to overcomplicate it, I think that's what's going on here.
Scott Masters is asking, here's the holy grail of all Patriots conversations. Now that you have been so deep into the world and mind of the organization, any insight on the Malcolm Butler benching?
I write about the Malcolm Butler benching in the book. There's a whole chapter about that Super Bowl and what happened, and also importantly, what happened afterwards in the locker room, and then in the weeks and months that followed going into that off season. I don't want to do any spoilers here and say what's in the chapter, but just that, yes, Scott, that is a subject that I was interested in. I know Patriots fans and actually people that aren't Patriots fans are interested in that. And I go into all that. The only thing I'll say is I was surprised to find how many players who played in that Super Bowl were not aware that Butler wasn't playing until the game was over. I mean, obviously some of his defensive teammates were aware of that, but a lot of the guys on the offensive side of the ball were not. So there was a revelatory moment in the locker room afterwards when people started realizing that Butler had never played.
Another question about Tampa. How much did Brady's wife have to do with going to Tampa?
I think that, you know, Brady, as a writer, I like the fact that the Patriots have these great sort of larger than life personalities in their organization. And in Brady, they certainly had one. And then he married one. I think Giselle she's a great figure in the story. I call Kraft a citizen of the world. Well, so is Giselle in the truest sense of the word. And, kudos to Brady and Giselle for their partnership and the way that they handled everything in New England over the last decade. I think that New England, maybe over time, and hopefully after reading this book, one of the things I hope that happens is that people will have a deeper appreciation for what the two of them did to be here and what they contributed while they were here. Her role is largely not really been thought about much, but as I wrote the book, I thought, she's a big part of Tom's success story in New England, certainly over the last 6 or 7 years. I'll just say that in the book, I write about some of the wives that I think are really important in this story, starting with Myra Kraft, Drew Bledsoe's wife, Maura, Tom Brady's wife, and others. But the role of them in this story, whenever you talk about football, you don't think about the role of women or the role of spouses. That's just like not part of the narrative. To me, it's a big part of the narrative. And so I did write about all of that because I think it's one of those areas that there was a lot to learn there. And I don't think Giselle is the reason that the dynasty broke up. I think she had a role in, frankly, helping keep it together for as long as it did, or as long as it was. And so I hope that people, have a clear picture of that as they go through those chapters.
Terry Robinson is asking, do you have any insight as to why, with a star quarterback who did not typically run with the ball, the Patriots didn't seem to build up a premier receiving core?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that question. I might have missed the beginning of it.
Do you have any insight as to why, with a star quarterback who did not typically run with the ball, the Patriots didn't seem to build up a premier receiving core?
When are we talking about, though? What time period?
Terry, can you clarify that?
Hi, yeah. It seems like over the last several years, they didn't focus so much on the receivers. I know they brought in some older players, but from a draft perspective, trading perspective, it didn't seem as though there was as much of a focus on receivers as there might have been given Tom's capabilities.
So at least from where I sit, that was only last year. The year before that, they won the Super Bowl and they had Gronkowski and Edelman, and they had a great core the year before. And they went to 3 straight Super Bowls, won 2 of them, and arguably should have won the one in the middle. So I think the situation you're describing really applies more to last year. And I think there was an effort to bring some receivers in. They had Demaryius Thomas in training camp. He didn't make it. He didn't make the cut. And then, of course, they went out and got Antonio Brown. And to me, that was that is a huge indication of an effort to acknowledge that the receiving core by that point needed something else. They tried bringing, because they lost Gronkowski, they bring in Brown, and of course we all know what happened there. He only lasted for 1 game in New England because of issues off the field. But I think had Antonio Brown managed to stay on the roster and play the season, there might have been a really different narrative about last year, because he's a world-class receiver. And if he was on the field with Edelman and Sanu and some of these other guys, it makes everybody else better, and it takes a lot more pressure off Brady. But when they lost him after just one game, I think they had a huge hole, and then they lost Josh Gordon. And so it's not that there wasn't an effort to have good receivers there. I mean, Gordon and Brown imagine what the Patriots season would have been like if you had Edelman and Antonio Brown and Josh Gordon on the field at the same time through the season. We'd be having a totally different conversation right now, but that's not how it turned out. And so instead we had what amounted to a very frustrating season, especially the second half of the season.
Scott Masters is asking, there was a lot of conversation about the Jimmy G trade, timing, value, etc., and the thought that the second round pick from San Francisco was crazy low. Do you go into any of the thoughts about that trade? Seems to the untrained eye there was some politics or spite in the decision.
I go into it. I go right into it, actually. To me, what really happened is in the Dynasty. That story, a lot of what's been out, excuse me, reported, I think is skewed. And I obviously wondered about that going into this project. That was one of the things that I was curious about as I got toward the latter end of the story. But I think the account that you'll read in the Dynasty will answer a lot of questions about what actually happened, both with the draft and with the trade.
Jim Turner is asking, did Brady have control over who they sign or cut?
He did not. He certainly did not have that kind of control. There's a reference in the first chapter of the book, in chapter 1, about personnel decisions that involve offensive players and whether Brady was consulted on things like that. So, people can make up their own mind about whether he should have been or not, but the book lays out what the situation was with player personnel decisions between Brady and Belichick.
How did they handle Aaron Hernandez during the whole situation with that?
I mean, I have chapters on that. The Hernandez situation is covered extensively in the book. Again, I hate to just sort of read you or tell you, here's what it says in this chapter, but I can just assure you that the Hernandez saga is part of the Dynasty. And I approach it from the perspective of the Krafts and from Belichick, basically from the team standpoint of what they were dealing with and what they had to do.
There's no new questions at the moment, but was there anything else that maybe from the questions asked that brought to mind that you'd want to cover?
No, I don't have much voice left, to be honest with you. I apologize, but I'm losing my voice. So no, I don't.
That's okay. If you feel good about it, that was a really good conversation and everything. The questions asked and the answers given were great. If you wanted to wrap this up here, that'd be fine with us. And we really thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Terry, Jim, Virginia, and everybody else. It was a pleasure. And have a nice Labor Day weekend.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.